Today was the Global Tech Conference, and Emily was set to present her research on AI ethics. As a sophomore studying computer science and ethics, this was the moment she had been working toward for months. She had spent countless late nights preparing her presentation on how biased algorithms could reinforce inequality and racial prejudice in society. It was a subject close to her heart, especially as a young Black woman navigating the tech world, which often overlooked voices like hers. She took a deep breath, standing in front of the mirror and adjusting her blazer. "You've got this," she whispered to herself, trying to push down the growing nerves. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from her mentor, Professor Naomi Jacobs. "Are you ready to blow them away?" Emily smiled at the message. Professor Jacobs had been one of her biggest supporters since she arrived at college, pushing her to step into spaces where her voice needed to be heard. "I hope so. I'm on my way," Emily texted back before grabbing her bag and heading out the door. The subway station was as busy as ever, with people hurrying in every direction, their heads down, lost in their own worlds. Emily weaved through the crowd, her mind already racing with thoughts of her presentation. She had rehearsed it so many times, but still, the pressure weighed on her. This was her moment to show the tech world that diversity and ethics mattered in innovation. She stepped onto the platform, checking her watch. Perfect timing. The train would be here in a few minutes, and she would make it to the conference with enough time to review her slides one more time. She stood near the edge, scanning the crowd. Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice. "Excuse me, miss?" Emily turned to see a tall, middle-aged man in a police uniform standing a few feet away from her. His stern expression immediately put her on edge. "Yes," she replied, trying to keep her voice calm. "I need to see your ID," the officer said, stepping closer. His name tag read Marshall. Emily blinked in confusion. "My ID? Why?" she asked, surprised. She wasn't doing anything wrong, just waiting for her train like everyone else. "It's a routine check," Officer Marshall said, though his tone suggested anything but routine. His gaze moved over her, landing on her backpack, as though sizing her up. Emily's heart sank. She had heard about situations like this. She had experienced moments of suspicion before, but never had it felt so direct. She was a young Black woman with a backpack, and that seemed enough to warrant suspicion. "I'm just on my way to a conference," she said, her voice tinged with frustration, but controlled. "I'm a guest speaker." Marshall raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. "A guest speaker, huh? Can you open your bag for me?" Emily clenched her fist, trying to suppress her rising anger. "Is there a reason you're stopping me? I haven't done anything." "Just open the bag, ma'am," Marshall said, his voice firm. "Don't make this more difficult than it has to be." Reluctantly, Emily unzipped her backpack and showed him her neatly packed clothes, her laptop, and her notes. Marshall rifled through her belongings with an air of indifference, as if he were just going through the motions. It was clear that he didn't expect to find anything, and yet here they were, under the scrutiny of several onlookers. After what felt like an eternity, he zipped her bag and handed it back to her. "All right, you're free to go," he said, already looking toward the next person on the platform. Emily's face burned with humiliation as she glanced at the departure board. Her train had left. She was stranded. By the time Emily managed to catch a later train, her nerves were completely frayed. The humiliation from her encounter with Officer Marshall clung to her, and the sense of injustice made her hands tremble. She stared out of the window, watching the city pass by, her thoughts swirling. She kept replaying the moment in her head. The suspicion in his eyes, the way he dismissed her as if she were nothing but trouble. How many other people had been treated the same way, for no reason other than the way they looked? She was late now, and the weight of the morning pressed down on her, making her stomach churn. But she couldn't let this ruin her day. She had worked too hard for this moment. The conference was her chance to shine, to show the world what she was capable of. The train pulled into the station, and Emily grabbed her things, rushing toward the exit. She could feel her phone buzzing again, but she didn't stop to check. The conference was just a few blocks away. When she finally arrived, the lobby of the conference venue was bustling with tech enthusiasts and professionals, all chatting excitedly. Emily hurried to the registration desk, her breath coming in short bursts as she explained her delay. The staff, understanding and efficient, quickly directed her to the conference hall. She had just a few minutes before her session began. As she made her way inside, Emily felt her heart pound in her chest. The hall was filled with people, all waiting for the next speaker to take the stage. Her hands shook as she set up her laptop and slides, but she forced herself to focus. This was her moment, and she couldn't let Officer Marshall's actions take it from her. The lights dimmed and the room hushed as Emily stepped up to the podium. She felt a surge of nerves, but she steadied herself, taking a deep breath. Her eyes scanned the audience. Business leaders, tech innovators, and fellow students, all watching her with anticipation. She began to speak, her voice strong despite the turmoil she had faced that morning. "Thank you all for being here today," she started, introducing her research on AI ethics. As we push forward in technological innovation, we must ask ourselves who is being left out and how the systems we create can unintentionally reinforce existing inequalities. As she spoke, Emily found her confidence growing. The injustice she had experienced earlier only fueled her message. She moved through her slides, explaining how biased algorithms could have real-world consequences, from facial recognition errors to hiring discrimination. Her words were a call to action for the tech industry to be more inclusive and aware of the biases that existed within their systems. By the time she finished, the room was silent for a moment before breaking into applause. Emily exhaled, the tension leaving her body as she realized she had done it. She had delivered her presentation despite everything that had happened. She smiled, grateful for the opportunity to speak her truth. As she stepped off the stage, several attendees approached her, praising her work and asking for more information. One journalist even asked for an interview, eager to share her story. Emily felt a wave of relief and pride wash over her. She had turned a horrible morning into a moment of triumph. But as the day continued, she couldn't shake the feeling that what had happened at the train station needed to be addressed. Her experience wasn't unique. Too many people faced moments like that every day, stopped, questioned, and dismissed because of their race. She knew she couldn't stay silent. This wasn't just about AI ethics anymore. It was about confronting the biases that permeated every aspect of society. While Emily's presentation was gaining attention, miles away, Officer David Marshall sat in his patrol car, idly flipping through the radio stations. His mind wandered, reflecting on the day. It had been just another shift, routine checks, a few minor incidents. But for some reason, the encounter with the young woman at the subway station lingered in his mind. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. She had seemed suspicious and he had followed protocol. But now, watching the evening news in his car, her face appeared on the screen. She was speaking confidently in front of a large audience, talking about technology and ethics, making waves in an industry that was dominated by a certain kind of person, people who didn't look like her. Marshall turned up the volume, listening as the news anchor praised Emily for her groundbreaking work and mentioned that she had faced a troubling incident earlier that morning. His chest tightened as he realized that he had been the cause of that incident. He turned off the radio, but Emily's voice echoed in his mind, challenging him in a way he wasn't prepared for. For the first time in years, Marshall felt a twinge of doubt about how he had handled the situation. It was just a routine check, wasn't it? As he sat in the quiet of his patrol car, staring out at the street, something shifted within him, a discomfort that was hard to ignore. Emily sat at her desk later that night, her laptop open, the screen filled with articles and social media posts about the conference. Her presentation was being shared widely, and while many were praising her insights, others were focusing on her earlier encounter with Officer Marshall. The incident was gaining traction online, with people commenting on the racial bias inherent in everyday policing. She scrolled through the comments, a mixture of emotions swirling inside her: anger, frustration, empowerment. Emily knew she couldn't just let this moment pass without addressing what had happened. This was bigger than her. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she began typing. Today was supposed to be a monumental day for me. I was invited to speak at the Global Tech Conference about my research on AI ethics and bias. But before I even made it there, I was stopped by a police officer for no reason other than the fact that I was a young black woman standing on a train platform with a bag. I hadn't done anything wrong, but I was treated like a suspect. I didn't belong. This kind of discrimination is something people like me face every day, and it needs to stop. She paused, her heart racing. This was a bold move. calling out the very injustice she had experienced. But it was the truth, and the world needed to hear it. With a deep breath, Emily hit post. Within minutes, the responses started pouring in. People from all walks of life were commenting, some expressing solidarity, others sharing their own experiences of racial profiling. But there were also the detractors, the ones who dismissed her claims or tried to justify the officer's actions. Emily ignored the negative comments, focusing instead on the overwhelming support. Her phone buzzed, a message from her best friend Kara. "Emily, I saw your post. Are you okay? Do you need anything?" Emily smiled at the text, grateful for Kara's concern. She typed a quick response. "I'm okay, just needed to get it out there. This is too important to stay silent about." She stared at the screen, watching the likes and shares grow by the second. This was the start of something bigger than just her personal experience. Emily had found her voice, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it away. Logan Marshall sat in his small kitchen, staring at his untouched dinner. The silence of his apartment felt heavier tonight, weighed down by the news segment he had watched earlier, and the thoughts swirling in his mind. He couldn't get Emily's face out of his head, her voice confident and strong, challenging everything he thought he knew. He picked up his phone, hesitating before searching for her name online. Her social media post appeared almost immediately, her words glaring back at him from the screen. "I was stopped by a police officer for no reason other than the fact that I was a young black woman standing on a train platform with a bag." The words hit him hard. Was that really what had happened? He had been doing his job, right? Or had he let his own biases cloud his judgment? Logan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He had been on the force for nearly 2 decades, and he had always prided himself on being fair and doing what was right. But now, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't so sure. He thought back to the academy, to the lessons they had learned about policing. But no one had ever talked about the implicit biases that officers might carry, or how those biases could influence their decisions on the job. It had always been about authority, control, and keeping the community safe. But was he really keeping everyone safe? Logan's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from his colleague, Officer Roberts. "Saw that post about the girl you stopped today? People are blowing it out of proportion. Don't sweat it, man. We do our jobs and people complain. Same old story." Logan stared at the message, his stomach turning. It wasn't just another complaint. This was different. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had messed up, and now the whole world was watching. He set his phone down, his thoughts heavy. Something had to change. A few days later, Emily found herself sitting across from Professor Jacobs in her mentor's office. The room was filled with books on technology, ethics, and law, the shelves neatly organized, just like Professor Jacobs herself. She had called Emily in to talk after seeing the post and the growing attention it was getting. "I'm proud of you, Emily," Professor Jacobs said, her voice steady and calm. "You took a difficult moment and turned it into an opportunity to spark a conversation that needs to happen." Emily nodded, though she still felt the weight of the situation. "I just couldn't stay quiet. It wasn't right." Professor Jacobs leaned back in her chair, her eyes thoughtful. "And you shouldn't have. But now that the conversation has started, where do you want to take it? What do you want to achieve?" The question hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Emily had been so focused on speaking out, she hadn't really thought about what came next. "I don't know," Emily admitted. "I just want things to change. I don't want anyone else to feel like I did that day." Professor Jacobs nodded. "Change is a long road, but you've already taken the first step. I think you should consider speaking out more, doing interviews, writing more about your experience. You have a platform now, and people are listening." Emily sat with the idea for a moment. It was daunting. She had always been more comfortable behind the scenes, focusing on her research. But now she was at the center of a growing movement, and it felt like a responsibility she couldn't ignore. "I think you're right," Emily said slowly. "If people are listening, then maybe I can help them understand. Maybe I can make a difference." Professor Jacobs smiled. "I know you can." Logan paced the floor of his apartment, his phone in hand. He had been thinking about Emily's post nonstop, replaying their encounter at the station in his head. He had made a mistake. He could see that now, clearer than ever. And it wasn't just a mistake. It was a failure to recognize his own biases, something he had never thought much about before. With a deep breath, Logan pulled up Emily's social media profile and sent her a message. "Emily, this is Officer Logan Marshall. I wanted to apologize for my actions at the train station. I realize now that I acted out of bias, and I deeply regret how I treated you. I know my apology doesn't change what happened, but I'm willing to listen and learn if you're open to having a conversation." He hit send, his heart pounding. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As the hours passed, Logan checked his phone more times than he cared to admit. He wasn't sure if Emily would even respond, and he wouldn't blame her if she didn't. But he hoped that somehow she would give him a chance to make things right. Across town, Emily saw the notification pop up on her phone. She stared at the message, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to dismiss it as just another empty apology, but something about the tone of the message, about the fact that Logan had reached out at all, made her pause. She wasn't ready to forgive him, but just maybe, this was a chance to start a conversation that needed to happen. A week later, Emily and Logan found themselves sitting across from each other at a coffee shop near campus. The atmosphere was tense, the air between them filled with unspoken words and unresolved tension. Emily stirred her coffee, her mind still grappling with the fact that she was here, face to face with the man who had humiliated her just days ago. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet with me," Logan said, breaking the silence. His voice was quieter than she expected, more vulnerable. Emily nodded, not sure how to respond. "I almost didn't," she admitted, "but I think this conversation is important." Logan looked down at his hands, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his coffee cup. "I've been a cop for a long time, Emily, and I've always thought I was doing the right thing, protecting people. But what happened at the station, it wasn't right. I see that now." Emily listened, her defenses still up, but her curiosity piqued. "So, what do you want to do about it?" Logan sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I don't know yet, but I want to learn. I want to understand. I can't change what I did, but I can try to do better." Emily leaned forward, her gaze sharp. "It's not just about you doing better. It's about changing the system that allows things like this to keep happening." Logan nodded slowly. "I get that. And I want to be part of that change if you'll let me." The conversation continued, with both of them sharing their perspectives. Emily as a young Black woman trying to navigate a biased world, and Logan as an officer coming to terms with the realities of his profession. It was uncomfortable, difficult, but necessary. By the end of the meeting, they weren't friends. They weren't even close to being on the same page, but they had started something. And for both of them, that felt like a step in the right direction. After her meeting with Logan, Emily felt conflicted. She had been hesitant to meet with him, but their conversation left her with a mixture of frustration, understanding, and cautious optimism. She still wasn't sure if Logan truly understood the depth of the problem, but she could see that he was trying. That at least was a start. A few days later, Emily received a message from a local news outlet. They had caught wind of her social media post, and now they wanted to interview her about the incident and her meeting with the officer. Emily hesitated. She had spoken out once, but doing a public interview was a much larger platform. It wasn't just about telling her story. It was about representing so many others who had faced the same kind of injustice. Could she handle that kind of pressure? She called her best friend Kara for advice. "Should I do it?" Emily asked, pacing her small apartment. Kara didn't hesitate. "Yes, you have a voice, Emily, and people are listening. If you don't speak up, who will?" Emily sighed, still unsure. "What if I say the wrong thing? What if people don't take it seriously?" Kara's voice softened. "You won't say the wrong thing. You'll speak your truth. And trust me, people are already taking you seriously. This is your moment." Emily sat down on the edge of her bed, the weight of Kara's words sinking in. She knew she had to do this, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been silenced, dismissed, or ignored. The next day, Emily sat in front of the bright lights of a camera, her heart pounding as the interviewer began. "So, Emily," the reporter started, "your social media post has sparked a lot of attention. Can you tell us more about what happened that day at the train station?" Emily took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. I was on my way to the Global Tech Conference to present my research when I was stopped by a police officer. I hadn't done anything wrong, but he treated me like a suspect, asking for my ID, searching my bag, without any real reason. I was humiliated, and I realized that this wasn't just about me. This is something that happens to people of color every day, and it's time we talk about it. The interviewer nodded, her expression serious. And since then, you've had a conversation with Officer Marshall, the man who stopped you. How did that go? Emily paused, considering her words carefully. It was complicated. He apologized, and I believe he's trying to understand the impact of what happened. But it's not just about one person. It's about the system that allows these kinds of things to happen. We need to address the larger issue of bias in policing. The interview continued, with Emily sharing her thoughts on systemic racism and the importance of holding both individuals and institutions accountable. By the end, she felt a sense of relief. She had spoken her truth, and now the world knew. Logan watched Emily's interview from his living room, his hands gripping the edge of his chair. Hearing her recount the incident from her perspective was difficult. It was one thing to know he had messed up, but it was another to see the pain and frustration she had felt, broadcast for everyone to see. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. His life had been filled with routines, following procedures, doing his job by the book, but now everything felt uncertain. The world was changing around him, and he was struggling to keep up. The next day at the station, Logan couldn't escape the whispers. His colleagues had seen the interview too, and the reaction was mixed. Officer Roberts approached him with a smirk. "You see that girl on TV? She's really milking this thing, huh?" Logan clenched his jaw, his frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "She's not milking anything, Roberts. She's telling the truth." Roberts raised an eyebrow. "Come on, Logan. You know how these things go. The media blows everything out of proportion." Logan shook his head, his voice tight. "No, Roberts. We blew it out of proportion. We didn't listen. That's the problem." Roberts gave him a puzzled look, then shrugged. "Whatever you say, man." As Roberts walked away, Logan felt a surge of anger and shame. He had always thought of himself as a good cop, someone who treated people fairly. But now he was starting to see that good wasn't enough. That evening, Logan sat down with Chief Dawson, who had requested a private meeting to discuss the incident. Dawson was an older man, close to retirement, with a reputation for being tough but fair. "I've seen the interview," Dawson said, his voice steady. "This whole thing is becoming a bigger deal than any of us expected." Logan nodded, his expression grim. "I know, I messed up, Chief." Dawson leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "I've known you a long time, Logan. You're not a bad cop, but I think you've got some blind spots. We all do. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Logan swallowed hard. "I want to do better. I don't want to be part of the problem anymore." Dawson nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. "Then you need to start listening, really listening. Not just to your fellow officers, but to the community. We've got a bias training program coming up. I suggest you be the first to sign up." Logan left the meeting feeling both humbled and determined. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but he was ready to start doing the work. A few weeks later, Emily found herself once again preparing for a presentation, this time at a national tech conference. Her research on AI ethics had gained even more attention since the incident, and she had been invited to speak on a larger stage. But this time, Emily wasn't just going to talk about technology. She was going to talk about justice, about the ways bias could be built into systems, whether in AI algorithms or in human institutions like the police. As she stood backstage waiting for her turn to speak, Emily felt a familiar rush of nerves. But this time, she wasn't just nervous about her research. She was nervous about the responsibility she now carried, the responsibility to speak for those who couldn't, to call out injustice when she saw it. Her name was called and she stepped onto the stage. The audience was larger than any she had ever spoken to, the lights bright and almost blinding. Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. She could do this. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice echoing through the large auditorium. "Today I'm here to talk about the intersection of technology and ethics. But I'm also here to talk about something much bigger, the systems we build, both in technology and in society, and how they reflect our biases. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. We all have biases whether we realize it or not. And if we don't confront them, we risk embedding them into the very systems that shape our world. The audience was silent, listening intently. A few weeks ago, I was stopped by a police officer for no reason other than the fact that I was a young black woman standing on a train platform. That moment made me realize that bias isn't just something we see in the data, it's something we live with every day. And if we want to build a better future, we need to confront that bias head on. Emily's voice grew stronger, more confident as she spoke. She was no longer just the quiet researcher who focused on AI ethics. She was a leader, a voice for change. By the time she finished, the audience erupted in applause. Emily stepped off the stage, her heart racing with a mix of pride and purpose. She had found her voice, and she wasn't going to stop using it. Back at the station, Logan had begun his journey of self-reflection and change. He had signed up for the department's bias training, and while many of his colleagues dismissed it as unnecessary, Logan took it seriously. The training sessions were uncomfortable, forcing Logan to confront the ways his own biases had influenced his actions. But he stuck with it, determined to do better. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult session, Logan received a message from Emily. "I saw that you signed up for the training. I think that's a good step. Let's keep talking." Logan stared at the message for a moment, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. He replied quickly, "Thanks, I'd like that." As the weeks passed, Logan and Emily continued to meet, their conversations growing deeper and more meaningful. Logan listened as Emily shared her experiences, and Emily in turn began to see that Logan was genuinely trying to change. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of tension, still moments where they disagreed, but they were both committed to the process, to the idea that understanding and change were possible. Months later, Logan and Emily stood side by side at a community event, addressing a small crowd that had gathered to discuss bias in policing. It was a surreal moment for both of them, standing together after everything that had happened. Emily spoke first, her voice calm and steady. "Change doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, and it takes work. But if we're willing to listen to each other, to challenge ourselves and our biases, I believe we can make real progress." Logan nodded, stepping up to the microphone. "I've made mistakes. I'm still learning. But I'm committed to being part of the solution, not the problem. We all have a role to play in making our community a better, safer place for everyone." The crowd applauded, and as the event ended, Logan and Emily exchanged a look of mutual respect. They had started as adversaries, but now they were partners in the fight for justice. As they left the event, Emily turned to Logan with a small smile. "You've come a long way, Officer Marshall." Logan chuckled softly. "Thanks, but I've still got a long way to go." Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. "We both do, but at least we're on the right path." The road ahead would be challenging, filled with more hard conversations and difficult decisions. But for the first time, both Logan and Emily felt a sense of hope, a belief that real change was possible. As the credits roll on their journey, we're reminded that this is just the beginning. Logan and Emily's story may have found a resolution, but the fight for justice continues. If you were inspired by their journey, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience, redemption, and the power of change. Together, we can make a difference.